Welcome, everyone. My name is Sue Harmon, and I'm a librarian at the Manchester City Library in Manchester, New Hampshire. Thank you for joining us today for the fifth part of the Culturally Curious Art Series, Seaside Escapes, the Art and Architecture of the New England Coast, presented by Jane O'Neill. I'm joined by librarians from your hometown. This program is made possible by the combined resources of the GMILCS libraries, and we're very excited to be able to offer educational programs to you. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. This is a webinar, so all attendees are muted. Jane will answer questions at the end of the program, so please use the Q&A box for questions and feel free to use the chat to share your impressions and comments. Make sure that the message is going to everyone and not just the panelists, and this program is also being recorded. In the next few days, you'll receive an email link with the program recording and a survey. Please take a few moments to tell us what you thought of the program. Your responses really do help us, and they let us know what types of programs you'd like to see in the future. And you can also sign up for your library's newsletter for upcoming programs and library news. Carolyn Keeney from the Goffstown Library is here to talk about a program coming up in Goffstown.
Yes, so next Thursday, August 24th, an attorney from the New Hampshire Legal Assistance is going to talk about how to stay in your home. She'll discuss common issues faced by older adults and provide strategies to help you stay in your home. In the program, they'll also explore information, including how to prepare for a medical emergency, as well as understanding and maximizing your public benefits, including Medicare and Medicaid. And that's at 10 a.m. on the third floor.
Thank you, Carolyn. All right, and for Manchester, we have an upcoming series of programs, so I'll talk about the big one. In partnership with New Hampshire Humanities, the Manchester City Library will support the statewide NEA Big Read of The Bear by Andrew Krivak from September 1st through November 30th. An initiative of the NEA in partnership with the Arts Midwest, a Big Read broadens our understanding of our world, our communities, and ourselves through the power of a shared reading experience. The Bear offers readers an opportunity to join an unimaginable journey into a world both familiar and unknown as we consider what future we want for New Hampshire. Set in a post-apocalyptic future, it is a story of the last two people on Earth, a father and daughter. The novel explores powerful themes about the importance of intergenerational storytelling, our complicated relationship with the environment, and how to prepare for an unknown future. Please join us for our Big Read book discussion on October 26th at 6:30 p.m. Attendance can be in person or virtual. The discussion will be led by New Hampshire humanities scholar Damian Costello. There are many more programs planned throughout New Hampshire that explore and celebrate the themes of the bear. To find more programs and public discussions, please visit www.newhampshirehumanities.org/bigread. And your presenter today is Jane O'Neill. Jane curates and delivers art appreciation programs to audiences throughout New England and beyond. Jane holds a master's in art history from Boston University and a master's in education from Harvard University. A New Hampshire native, she's worked at some of the state's most esteemed cultural institutions, including the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen, where she served as executive director, and the Currier Museum of Art, where she held the role of senior educator. Jane has also taught at the college level for more than a decade, most recently at Southern New Hampshire University. For more information, you can visit iamculturallycurious.com. And I will hand it over to Jane for the good part of the program.
Thanks so much, Sue and Caroline and everyone for hosting this series. And thank you to everybody who's taking time out of their days to learn a little bit more about the subject. I always feel like this program is as close as you can get to going to the beach without actually having to leave your house. And in these last few weeks of summer, where maybe you're ready for the fall, or maybe you think I haven't taken full advantage of everything, maybe this program will inspire a few road trips so that you can really kind of squeeze the most out of your summer vacation. So we're going to be looking at works by some of the greatest American artists of all time and some of the most elaborate works of architecture too. So we'll be getting back to this gorgeous image on the screen in just a little bit, but I wanted to start off with almost like a preamble, like an opportunity to prime the pump, get us thinking about images of the sea and the shoreline. And I wanted to share kind of the variety that exists out there before we get into the content per se. So let's start with this beautiful painting by John Frederick Kensett. This is from 1860, and it's a view of a beach in Beverly, Massachusetts. And I just love the kind of crystal clarity that you get with an image like this. You can almost feel your feet in the sand walking out towards the water, and you get all of the wonderful details of the people enjoying the shoreline here, the boats in the distance, and these gentle waves kind of lapping the shore. Other artists, of course, focus on different elements of life along the shoreline. The German American born artist Albert Bierstadt focuses on the drama. And isn't this picture just so alluring? This is called Seal Rock from 1872. And here we have this kind of churning sea, a darker sky that with just a little bit of sun peeking through, illuminating these cresting waves here. And you get that glorious seafoam green. It's just such a wild picture. Here, nature looks a little scary, doesn't it? But William Glackens focuses on something completely different when he takes up the subject of the shoreline. His picture of a New London beach from 1918 is really about the people, this heavily trafficked beach here, and how people are interacting with each other or sunbathing in the foreground or going out on the pier over here. You almost miss the water, and it's so dense with people, you almost miss the sand here too. You just get the effect of this bright summer day where everybody is out and about. So the watercolorist Charles Demuth gives us a view of the dunes at Provincetown from 1914 that just transports you to this kind of otherworldly, ethereal, very peaceful space here. He uses these colors, the purples, the blues, that make you feel like you could almost be on another planet in some ways, but it provides this kind of evocative suggestion of the beach and the quiet at certain times of day. I always feel like this must be the beach at morning. So our last image in this preamble that I've created here is almost a silly one. This is a painting by the artist Roy Lichtenstein, who's always used this kind of comic book visual language for his paintings. So, so this one is abstract and it might be slightly confusing and, like I said, a little bit silly, but it's called Nude at the Beach. And so in this case, the nude is presumably a female figure. There's a long blonde ponytail here, this kind of blobby body with holes in it, holding a shovel. And those holes in the body seem to kind of correspond to this piece of Swiss cheese that is inexplicably on the beach as well. And I hate to disappoint people, but this is in fact the only nude we're going to see tonight. So drink it in. All right, so let me give you a sense in terms of how we'll move through the material in the rest of the hour that we have together. I've broken this up into three main sections. We're first going to get started with the concept of the artist colonies that exist along the shore of New England, and we'll focus in on one particularly well documented artist colony. And then we'll turn our attention and highlight just a few artists that for whom painting the shoreline is such a big part of their body of work. And I love some alliteration. So we have Homer, Haslam, and Hopper for that. And then we'll wrap up with the summer cottages at Newport, Rhode Island, and the very quirky house of Beauport in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And like I said, we'll be seeing this image just a little bit later. So let's get started with the lure of the shore and art colonies. If you're from the New England area, you've probably heard of Ogunquit and Gloucester and these other seaside communities functioning as artist colonies. And there really isn't a lot of evidence of those colonies today, other than the fact that there's still various scenic landscapes, they still draw artists, but the artist colonies were particularly robust in the first few decades of the 20th century. So you had artist colonies up in Monhegan, Maine, through Ogunquit, and then in Massachusetts in Gloucester, Cape Ann, and Provincetown, and then all the way down here in Connecticut at Old Lyme and Coscob. And the Old Lyme art colony is really the best documented. There is, in fact, a museum dedicated to it called the Florence Griswold Museum. So if American Impressionism is really your kind of art, you might want to take a road trip to Old Lyme. So let me introduce you to Florence Griswold. Here she is on the left. She was born in 1850, and she owned this beautiful Georgian mansion that was kind of falling apart by the turn of the century. She's a middle-aged woman. She has to make some sort of income to support herself and her sickly sister. So she decides to rent out rooms in her house, $7 for a week in a room at this seaside house. So who wouldn't want to take advantage of that? But she was somehow very good at bringing artists together, and so this very vibrant community of artists begins to gather around Florence Griswold in the summers in Old Lyme, Connecticut. And I think it's important to highlight the fact that most of these artists were living in New York City or living in Boston. And like the rest of us, they just wanted to get out of town. They wanted to go on a vacation, but they also needed to produce art, and they needed to produce art that was of beautiful locales. So why not go someplace that's seaside and affordable like this one, and have the joy of somebody like Florence Griswold, who's really there to nurture your endeavor as an artist, your career as an artist. So she was the nucleus of this art community, to the extent that with this painting here, done in 1906 by the artist Willard Metcalf, called May Night, we can see a kind of idealized or romanticized version of Florence Griswold crossing this field in front of her house. She's under a canopy of stars here. The house itself is idealized too, because let me tell you, at the beginning of the 20th century, it was kind of falling apart. The paint was chipping, the shrubs were all overgrown, but here it looks like some sort of Greek temple. And so she's approaching it in the middle of the night, and there's just this kind of wonder about this scene. And so Willard Metcalf, the artist here, actually offered this painting to Florence Griswold as a form of payment, because he hadn't been paying for the room that he had been using for several weeks. And as a landlord, she actually said, no, I can't take it. It's the best thing you've ever done. Go and do something with it. Enter it into a competition. And that's exactly what he did. He won first prize and $1,000 in a competition. And today, this painting is in the National Gallery of Art. So it kind of speaks to her taste and her encouragement of these artists. Now, what does an artist colony look like around the year 1900? Believe it or not, these artists got pretty dressed up to head outside with their tiny little easels and their canvases and to paint outdoors. They almost look like a group of bankers, don't they? So they would gather together, they would paint right alongside each other oftentimes to kind of give each other feedback. And I think that group experience was so nurturing to so many of them, created that great sense of community. Now, Florence Griswold's home wasn't right on the beach in Old Lyme per se. It was right along the Lieutenant River, which is a tidal river flowing into Long Island Sound. So you can see a lot of these artists kind of stuck close to Florence Griswold's property. And the result of that is fewer images of surf and sand and more of these images of flowers and that river in the distance or in the middle ground. So we have another painting here by Willard Metcalf. In the middle, we have a painting by William Robinson. And then over here on the right, a beautiful picture by Clark Voorhees. And in all of these images, there's this full expression of American Impressionism. The scenery here just provided that perfect opportunity to use that loose, flowing, broken brushstrokes, or visible brushstrokes, emulating the style of the French Impressionists who were working a couple decades earlier. So everything's kind of coming together here in Old Lyme, Connecticut. And then at the end of the day, all of these formal looking artists would come together and have dinner out on the piazza at Florence Griswold's home. And so the men would sit at one table typically, and the women would sit at another table. And it looks like a pretty formal affair, doesn't it? It doesn't necessarily look like the most fun dinner conversation that you're ever going to have. But this picture sort of betrays the fact that these folks had so much in common, and these dinners were really joyful and boisterous, so much so that they called themselves the Hot Air Club. So they really, I guess they could really kind of talk a good game at these dinners, and this was considered truly the height of Bohemia. I know they look like bankers, but they were having a great time, and they were, eccentric artists of the day. Now, one of the things that they would do in Florence Griswold's house was sort of leave a calling card, a thank you note in the form of a painting on the panel of the wall in her dining room. So there are more than 40 of these paintings that were done in the panels in her dining room. I particularly love this little corner over here, the lovely lady with her parasol, another vision of Florence Griswold's home, and then this beautiful kind of nocturne, the seascape with the lanterns hanging down from the tree, the branches of this willow tree, just gorgeous. Now, another view of this same room shows there's a big fireplace in the room. And just along the top of this fireplace, there's a 9-foot long, very skinny painting done called The Fox Chase, painted by the artist Henry Rankin Poor in 1905. And this fox chase speaks specifically to the kind of experiences and the kinds of relationships that these artists had. Now, I can't show it in great detail in full, but I'll show you a couple of fun details here. So we have the fox. And when I say the fox chase, this is like a fox hunt that he's depicting, but he has it set here in Old Lyme at the artist colony. So he's depicted his fellow artists, identifiable artists here. And they are like the bloodhounds. They are on their feet and they're running after this fox. And they look a little silly, right? But it shows that they are like-minded and that they are heading in the same direction. You can imagine that they were probably running for the dinner table like this every night too. So what a great way to show a group of great friends, who would get together every summer. And these artists did that. They got together every summer for the better part of 2 decades. So they really know each other very well. Now, just a few other details that I really love from that same long 9-foot painting. Over here on the right, we have Willard Metcalf, who painted that lovely scene of Florence Griswold at night. Here he is painting on the sand, Florence Griswold's house in the background. Notice the booze in the foreground. That was also really important to these artists. And then one other artist who we'll be getting to know in just a little bit, his name is Childe Hassam. He was also a pivotal figure at the art colony in Old Lyme. Here he is painting on the beach with his shirt off. He was kind of a heroic figure for these other artists. So this gives you a sense in terms of the really important role that these art colonies had for these artists to come together and really help each other improve as artists and provide this sense of connection that they probably didn't get all year long working alone in their studios. Okay, let's shift gears, and I want to introduce you to the work of 3 great American artists, and we're going to really zero in on how their work integrated views of the sea. And probably the best known of the 3 is Winslow Homer. He's the oldest of the 3. He was born in 1836. He died in 1910. Here he is over here on the left, looking pretty serious. Now, Winslow Homer sort of cut his teeth at making art as a young man during the Civil War. He was embedded with the troops. He was down in the front lines of these battles, and he started sketching and then later painting some of the things that he saw. So his painting called The Sharpshooter over here from 1863 shows a particularly terrifying truth of the Civil War. We think of the Civil War battlefields as the North and South lining up on 2 sides and sort of shooting at each other. other, running at each other. But there were also sharpshooters who were positioned in these kind of clandestine settings who had the ability to take out a mark from half a mile away. And for Winslow Homer, our artist, and for the public in general, this was a very terrifying truth of modern warfare. So the realities and the horrors of the Civil War sort of leave this long shadow in the life and work of Winslow Homer. And so after the war, he creates these kind of nostalgic scenes of what America had been like. It's really not a reflection of what America was like. More people were heading to the cities. It was, rapidly becoming an industrial country. But he would show these rural scenes, kids from one-room schoolhouses. This is a picture called Snap the Whip that's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And even though it's a scene of children playing, there does seem to be this quiet to the scene. Now, when Winslow Homer, several years later, when he is 47 years old, he kind of gives up painting like this altogether, and he moves to Prouts Neck, Maine. He moves on into the carriage house on a piece of property that belonged to his family. And this is the carriage house, and this is how close it is to the water in Maine. He converts the carriage house into his home and studio, and you can go and visit it yourself. You can get tickets through the Portland Museum of Art, and I believe you start your tours at the Portland Museum, and they drive you out to Prouts Neck, Maine. It is about a 20-minute drive, and then you can go see this beautiful space. It's been lovingly restored. You can see from this photo that there is this almost elaborate second-story porch here that was added to the carriage house, and that was specifically for Winslow Homer to paint on. He had this outdoor perch essentially overlooking the water. Here's another view here. You can see what a view he had, what an advantage he had for creating these beautiful scenes that he's so well known for during this mature part of his career. Now, who wouldn't want to paint there, right? Winslow Homer did not want to be disturbed while he was painting. He didn't want any looky-loos, people hanging over his shoulder. He cultivated a reputation of being a recluse, a little bit of a hermit, so much so that he even painted this sign. It's still there at the studio. It says, "Snakes, snakes, mice." So maybe if you don't like people ringing your own doorbell, you could do a sign like that. So it's in Prouts Neck that Winslow Homer begins to create these images of the ocean, man and nature, really. And they're incredibly powerful images. And truly, every major American museum has to have one of these, really, to have a great American collection. This is a painting from the mid-1880s. It's called The Fog Warning, and it's at the MFA in Boston. And this is a painting all about, the awesome power of the sea, particularly in the face of one small human being. So in this scene, we see an anonymous fisherman. We can see he's been hard at work, and he is looking out in the distance towards this boat that he needs to get back to. And we can see, the waves are high here. This wouldn't be an easy boat to get to if you're just paddling in a little rowboat like this. And now with the fog warning, we can see this bank of fog coming in towards this fisherman. Will he make it back there in time? Will he survive, really? This was as good as HBO for somebody living in the 1880s. This was high drama. This man's life is on the line, and it's painted in this majestic way, making him this anonymous person that you're kind of rooting for. So Winslow Homer continues to focus on these narratives of these small individuals who are up against the vastness and the power of the ocean. This is a painting from 1885 called The Herring Net. It's in the Chicago Art Institute. And this one, I think, is every bit as good as the one that we just saw. In this picture, it's like this dark kind of murky day. There's a little bit of sunlight filtering down, kind of glowing off of the caps on these fishermen, and then making these herring kind of sparkle as they're pulling them out of the ocean. But the detail here that always just kind of stops my heart is this figure who's hanging over the edge of the rowboat in order to cantilever the weight of the herring coming in on the other side. Once again, the waves are really high. And when I look at this, I always think, oh my goodness, if that was me on the edge of that rowboat, like we'd be flipped, right? Like there's so much danger inherent in what they're doing. So once again, we've got these little heroes up against the power of the ocean. In this painting from 1886 that's at the Clark Art Institute, it's called The Undertow. Now we actually have people who've been overcome by the power of the sea. These two women who had been close to drowning have been saved by these very idealized young men with these sort of sculpted bodies here. They almost look like Greek statues, right? And once again, we don't see their faces. They're just doing this heroic work in up against the awesome power of the ocean. So after a little while, really beginning in the 1890s, Winslow Homer decides he doesn't even need the people in these paintings anymore. It's really just about the ocean. So this is a painting from 1895. It's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it's called Nor'easter. And we all know, if you're from New England, that these nor'easters are like these long, slow, churning storms that can last for like 5 hours. And they are wild and they're dangerous. Now, believe it or not, Winslow Homer had actually included two fishermen in the foreground who were kind of watching the storm. And even after this painting was sold, he decided he's going to take them out. It's really just about the majesty and the power of the sea, this huge sea spray that takes up a third of the painting over here, and you know, the dark sky and the waves so high in the scene. And so this becomes his focus as an artist. And this is like what people and art historians just go gaga over. So this is a painting called Weather Beaten from 1894. This is at the Portland Museum of Art. If you feel the need to go up to the Portland Museum of Art, obviously you need to stop in Ogunquit and do, you know, the Marginal Way walk, where you'll see rocks that look exactly like this. Winslow Homer painted a part of Maine that is so recognizable. And the shoreline from like Ogunquit up to York is just, I mean, it is nothing but these massive kind of blocky boulders. They kind of look like the ruins of a great city. And he just captured these moments of the waves crashing. And by the time we get to the year 1900, he's kind of mellowed out a little bit. Now it's not so much about the awesome power of the storm or the awesome power of the sea. Now we got a little bit more color in here, these orange peachy streaks across the sky, these little ribbons of color in the foreground. You begin to see all of these specific choices that he's making, you know, the lavenders that are in there, the yellows, and then this kind of frozen arabesque of sea spray coming up over that rock. So his depictions of the sea are really the gold standard. These are the images by which everything else is measured when it comes to the depiction of the shoreline in New England. So who is up for the task of trying to go toe to toe with Winslow Homer? Our next artist is Childe Hassam. He was a generation younger than Winslow Homer. He was born in 1859 and he lived until the 1930s. Now, here we see him over here in an undated self-portrait. He was the greatest American impressionist of all time. And we can see his self-portrait is done in an impressionist style. Probably his best known work, though, is not impressionist. This is a work that's called Boston Common at Twilight from 1891. And it's before he's kind of broken into that impressionist style, but it gives us a little peek of Boston, and it's just so Boston. This is a picture that's at the MFA, and apparently it's their best-selling postcard. Who doesn't love the brownstones over here, the trolleys, and the little girl feeding the birds? Well, for Childe Hassam, he was like, you know, all of these other artists that thought about who were going to Florence Griswold's house in the summer, living in Boston at first for him and then later on in New York City. He spent several summers with Florence Griswold creating images like this one over here on the right, which is called the Bridget Old Lime from 1908. To me, I look at this and I think it's every bit as good as Claude Monet in the French Impressionists. It's a picture that sort of glitters with the sunlight of a summer day. And you have the sparkling water, this kind of atmospheric perspective of the trees in the distance. It transports you. So it's interesting to think about how this one woman over here impacted his career, but he only spent a few summers there. He had a big influence on these other artists, but after that, he began to spend summers off the coast of New Hampshire and Maine at the Isles of Shoals. And incidentally, there was another woman who was at the nucleus of his experience there. Her name was Celia Thaxter, and she was a preeminent writer at the end of the 19th century. And she would host these summer salons at her home. This very long porch here was extended so that she could have an extra big living room in there because she had people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, all coming to her home in the summer. Can you imagine being in her living room and listening to those conversations? And in there with all of them was Childe Hassam, this impressionist artist who got to travel to this beautiful island every summer. So this relationship with Celia Thaxter, she was in part a muse for him too. So he would create images inspired by her. Once again, it's sort of an idealized likeness here. And here, Celia Thaxter is in her, excuse me, famous garden. Filled with these poppies. So we've got the riot of poppies in the foreground. Think once again how perfectly this is suited to the Impressionist style with these very loose brush strokes here. Nothing is rendered perfectly or precisely. It's just this really loose approximation, loose impression, of course. And then in the distance, the Atlantic Ocean with a peaceful little sailboat back there. So it's this beautiful garden that he goes back to again and again. Childe Hassam went to Celia Thaxter's home, went to the Isles of Shoals every summer for 30 years. He kept going even after she died. And it's these flowers, it's these scenes, it's the opportunity to capture both both the beauty of nature and the beauty of the ocean all in one. And so he would oftentimes create these images, sometimes in oil, sometimes in watercolor, like we see over on the right, that make you feel like you're just sitting there on the ground having a picnic in Celia Thaxter's garden. And if you're wondering about that garden, I should mention too, very quickly, it has been restored and you can go and visit it today. Those paintings are considered some of the very best in American art. So over here on the left, this is a work from the 1890s that is in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And then over on the right, this is at the National Gallery of Art. So everybody just needs their Childe Hassam Isles of Shoals painting. I tend to favor the one over here on the left. So like Claude Monet, Childe Hassam was an impressionist artist who wanted to capture his favorite subjects at various times of day, different atmospheres, different weather. So this is a beautiful depiction of the Atlantic Ocean in the morning, this lovely pink and lavender sky, the softness to the ocean here. It looks like bath water, doesn't it? And then these gorgeous little stripes of like magenta and yellow in the foreground. In addition to the sunrises, the sunsets are just as bit just every bit as glorious as that sunrise. They're candy colored. They're I mean, you get this rainbow in the sky and then these wonderful reflections. So Childe Hassam just kind of exercising the full extent of American Impressionism while he was along the New England shoreline. And our last major artist that I wanted to share with you is Edward Hopper. We can see him here as a younger man. He was the youngest out of the three artists that we're looking at tonight. He was born in 1882. He died in 1964. And I think for most Americans, they associate Edward Hopper with his paintings of New York City, his paintings of urban alienation, people sitting by themselves or looking very lonely, like the girl from the Automat from 1927. Here is a young woman sitting in a restaurant where you don't even get to interact with wait staff. There is, you just serve yourself through vending machines. So there's something particularly melancholy about these scenes from the city. I think his indisputably best known painting is this one here that's also at the Chicago Art Institute. This is the Nighthawks from 1942. It makes you feel like you are in New York City walking along this sidewalk and you've stumbled across this scene of this well-lit diner where you can see a few people out in the middle of the night. They really have no good reason to be out and about. We don't know why they're there. We don't know what they're up to, but they seem to be kind of interacting with the man behind the counter here. And Edward Hopper sets it up as almost like a movie screen, this big plate glass window, and invites us to imagine what's unfolding at that diner counter there. So Edward Hopper lived in New York City. He actually met his wife or reconnected with his wife at an art colony in Gloucester when they were in their 40s. They decided to get married, and they lived in a very spare fourth floor walk up. I think their existence was fairly difficult in New York City. So they started going out to the Cape every summer. And in 1934, they built their own house in South Truro, Massachusetts, right on the water over here. And we see Edward Hopper later on in life, and his wife Jo is back here in the distance. So I would say almost a third of Edward Hopper's artistic output, at least in terms of his oil paintings, were done or inspired by his time in the Cape. So every bit as important as his New York City paintings. Over here on the right, we have like a classic Cape Cod painting by Edward Hopper. It's called The Groundswell from 1939. And in this scene, well, it's almost like the automat, but it's set on the ocean. We have a few figures here on a boat. None of them are really interacting with each other. None of them are looking at each other. They all seem to be kind of concerned about navigating this little sailboat around this buoy here. We can see the waves are a little bit choppy coming in, but otherwise, this image is just drenched in light. It's executed with the most beautiful blues you could ever imagine. So it invites you in, but it doesn't ask you to get comfortable there, but it still has all the elements of something that you would love to see on a summer day. Now, Edward Hopper once famously said, "I suppose I'm not very human. What I wanted to do was paint sunlight on the side of a house." And that's exactly what Cape Cod allowed him to do. This is a painting called Cornhill Truro from 1930. And it's really what he's focusing on here, just how the sunlight hits the architecture. He loves architecture, but I would argue he loves shadows just as much as the sunlight. Sometimes he would just drive around in his car at night and then find interesting buildings to paint. So this is a painting from 1945 called Rooms for Tourists. Kind of amazing to think you could be off on vacation and a world-renowned artist could be sitting out in his car painting where the hotel where you're staying. Now, Edward Hopper continued to paint sunlight on the sides of houses. This is called Cape Cod Morning. This is called High Noon, and this is called Cape Cod Evening. These are at some of the very best art museums in the country. And in each of these, it really is, well, part of the focus is the quality of light in all of these images. His wife, Jo, served as an archivist of his work. And so with every painting he created, she would document it. She would write a short description of it and provide some other details. So with a work like this, I remember reading that she had said, "Oh, there's a woman in pink looking out the window to figure out what the weather's going to be like that day." And Edward Hopper said, "No, don't do that to my work. I'm not Norman Rockwell. I'm not telling a story. There's always supposed to be that sense of mystery there." And with each of these works, I mean, you're wondering who these people are, what are they doing, especially in Cape Cod evening over here on the right. It seems as though this collie dog has been alerted to something outside of the frame, but these figures over here don't seem concerned about it at all. In fact, they seem like they're having this silent argument between them, not looking at each other. The woman with her arms crossed over there. We can only imagine. We're left to kind of try to put those pieces together. Now, Edward Hopper's Cape Cod paintings also have this other quality to them, to many of them. And that is a really ambiguous relationship between architecture and the water. This picture always throws me. It's called The Lee Shore from 1941. Beautiful blues, sun-drenched location. Gorgeous sailboats, all of that. But it seems as though this little Victorian house is practically perched right in the water there. It just doesn't make logical sense to me. And that ambiguity, I think, is at the heart of this very famous Edward Hopper painting that I think is a favorite for so many. This one is called Rooms by the Sea from 1951. And if you feel like a little drive, you could go down to the Yale University Art Gallery and see it in person. This is a picture that gives us the suggestion of this pristine interior. And illogically, this door that you can open up and feel like you could just fall into the ocean here. But Edward Hopper also wants to remind us that he's painting light, right? So we've got these beautiful little squares and parallelograms of the light coming into this space. So we've got a painting that is real and surreal at the same time. Now, people can't get enough of Edward Hopper and Cape Cod. I feel like there's almost always some sort of Edward Hopper exhibition on Cape Cod somewhere, but right now there is a show at the Cape Ann Museum up through October, and people have just been raving about it. I haven't gotten a chance to see it yet. And I brought in this one last image just to reinforce Cape Cod and Edward Hopper. This is a picture called Cape Cod in October. I don't think it's necessarily one of his best paintings, but it recently sold for $10 million. So clearly, clearly there's something there that people really resonate with. Okay. So our last section for our last 15 minutes or so is this section on architecture and how architects have handled the task or the challenge or the opportunity of building homes by the ocean. Now, we're focusing on the summer cottages of Newport to get us started. And when we think of cottages, I mean, by definition, they're small, they're simple houses. You've got like one-room shacks over here by the beach, and then with a little bit of more decoration and ornamentation, the gingerbread houses, the famous gingerbread houses on Martha's Vineyard. But Newport, Rhode Island provides a different kind of opportunity for building for some of the country's most preeminent architects at the second half of the 19th century. So Newport, if you're not familiar with New England, is sort of equidistant between New York City and Boston. So you can have the leaders, the tycoons from each of those cities kind of coming together to summer. And it also has this very deep, very safe harbor. There, like major cruise ships can get in here. So it's a great place for sailing. You also have this spit of land that is this fine peninsula for building on either side. So you can get a lot of waterfront property in this little area here. So it becomes the place where you're going to build your summer home if you're the richest of the rich. And we see one of the first of the major Newport mansions comes into being right there around mid-century. This is from 1852. This is the Chateau sur Mer, which was built for a merchant from the old China trade. His name was William Shepherd Wetmore. And the architect here is Seth C. Bradford. Now, Chateau sur Mer, of course, means house on the ocean. It's built out of brick and Fall River granite, and it's built in this kind of mansard roof Victorian style here. And even as you look at it, you might not even get a true sense of the scale here. I mean, it's 4 stories. In some places, we can see a massive porte cochere over here. This is actually a 37,000 foot square foot property. So it's a massive building. And even though it's called Chateau sur Mer, it's actually not very close to the water, relatively speaking, in Newport, but it is on this massive expanse of property. So you can imagine the owner here, Wetmore, really just wanted to impress people, bring people together for garden parties, and show them just how big of a house he could build. Now, by the end of the 19th century, you have Vanderbilt level wealth coming in. And so the buildings get more elaborate, a little bit more delicate. They get ever closer to the water. So in comes Teresa Fair Ulrichs, and she was a silver heiress. She invited the architects McKim, Mead, and White to create a home for her on her piece of property that goes right down to the water. And so the result is this home called Rosecliff. It was actually inspired by one of the outbuildings at the Palace of Versailles. So you literally have a woman who's kind of playing Marie Antoinette here in America. It has all of these elegant features, the ionic columns on the first floor, this balustrade up at the top that actually hides a setback third floor, which is where the staff would live, at least during the summer. And the house itself is in this H shape. So the center section here is actually where the ballroom is, and it's the largest ballroom in Newport. It measures 40 feet by 80 feet. It is incredibly elegant when you step inside, so hard to imagine. Um, uh, Rosecliff itself is about 28,000 square feet. If it were to be sold today, it would probably be close to about $100 million. Imagine yourself at some soiree in this ballroom, and at the end of the night, you and your date can just walk out back across this lawn right down to the water there. So if you have the funds and the opportunity, you get as close to the water as possible, and you're building as ornately as possible. So in come the Vanderbilts, and this is the Marble House. This was designed by Richard Morris Hunt for William Vanderbilt. He actually had this marble house built for his wife on the occasion of her 39th birthday. We should all be so lucky, right? So the marble house, if it were sold today, would be well over $300 million. When it was built, it was unparalleled in terms of its opulence for an American house. So the Vanderbilts, I should state too, were like the richest family in the country, if not the world. And by the time they're building these Newport mansions, it's generational wealth. It's not even the original Commodore who had established all of these successful businesses. So now it's just part of the family that's managing the money. So at the Marble House, we have 50 rooms. We have literally just a house that's clad in marble, 500,000 cubic feet of it to be exact. This is the main staircase inside. The Vanderbilts imagined that this home would be a temple to the arts. Such a lofty ambition, especially an art temple to the arts that you could live in. Now, unfortunately for the Vanderbilts, William and Elva, who were married and were living in this home, they got divorced about 3 years after she was gifted this house. And so she kept it. And she actually spent a lot of time in Newport beyond that, but she spent very little time at the Marble House, which we can see from behind here. But she would use the Marble House for its laundry services. Apparently, it had state-of-the-art laundry. So you can think of the Marble House as the most expensive laundromat in the entire country. Now, this is on a slightly smaller piece of property than Rosecliff, but it does go right to the water again. They had this little Chinese tea house built in the backyard. And to their credit, to Alva Vanderbilt's credit, she did host rallies for women's suffrage at that tea house there. So they were doing something good with all of that money. So this leads us to the biggest and the best of all of these Newport mansions. And these are mansions that you can go and visit yourself. They're owned by the Newport Preservation Society. So you can tour through these and many others if you get the chance to go to Newport, Rhode Island. And along that, there is a cliff walk, a free path that winds behind all of these houses between them and the ocean. So you can get sort of an unusual sort of intimate view of these houses too. So this brings us to the Vanderbilt's house, the Breakers. We can see Chateau sur Mer just beyond it there. The Breakers is on an enormous piece of land. It's 14 acres, waterfront acres here. And the house itself is so big, it takes up an entire acre of land. This was a house designed for Cornelius Vanderbilt II. So again, this is generational wealth for the Vanderbilts. And the Breakers has 70 rooms, which sounds like a lot. It's actually not, because the Vanderbilts lived in a house in New York City that had more than twice that number of rooms. So this really was like they were roughing it when they were away on vacation. This house has more than 125,000 square feet, and it's built in this Italian Renaissance style. Where we can see, the arcade of windows and doors, and loose references to like classical styles here, and as well as a terracotta roof. So once again, it appears as though it's a 3-story building, but there is this kind of secret top floor, very tiny windows there. That's where the staff would live. But before we go feeling too bad for them, they also had these beautiful views too. So if you were going to visit the Vanderbilts, you would start outside this 30-foot high gate. There was an enormous fence that lined the property, 12-foot high fence that went all the way to the water. If you have this much money, you got to keep the riffraff out, right? So you go through the gate down here to the porte cochere, and after your carriage drops you off underneath this little protected area. It's not too much of a splash, this front door, right? It's just a sort of an impressive, maybe oppressive structure. You'd head inside, and you'd come through this entryway here into this grand hall that looks like you're in a European palace. You've got all like this incredible cornice here, the fresco on the ceiling, all of these columns. But if you're anything like me, you'd want to just walk right across over here, because this is where the open air terrace is. And that is where you could just drink in this view of the ocean, smell the salt water. That's apparently not where the Vanderbilts spent all of their time, because just on the main floor of the house, there are these other exquisite spaces. This is the music room. Looks like it's straight out of Versailles, doesn't it? This is where they would hold a lot of Newport Society events, including sort of debutante balls for the young ladies. And why not dedicate a whole marble mosaic clad room to your billiards table? That's what we're looking at here. Just the billiards room. And then one of the most famous rooms of all at the Breakers is the dining room, their formal dining room, which is just the dining room itself, larger than the average American house. It's 2,400 square feet. This table could expand to seat close to 40 people. So I can imagine that would be the invitation you would want to get. You would sit underneath these crystal chandeliers surrounded by these freestanding rose alabaster columns here. They look to be about 30 feet tall at least. And the whole room is just colored in gold and gilt. So this would be the way you would want to spend your evenings. Now, the last space in the Breakers that I wanted to share with you, just because there's some technology here that I think is pretty fascinating. This is actually Cornelius Vanderbilt's bathroom. And with this marble tub that he has over here, you can see there's the spigot, but then several faucets. So he could just turn a faucet and get salt water. He could turn a faucet and get fresh water, hot water, cold water, whatever have you. So here, this house built before the turn of the century really had some incredible modern conveniences that I think are just incredible is the scale and opulence of the house itself. So we'll wrap up just our last few minutes with a different kind of architectural wonder. This is a different kind of waterside fantasy. It's a place where scale and proportion are so distorted, you feel like you've gone through the looking glass. This is a house called Beauport in Gloucester, Massachusetts. It's designed, it dates roughly to 1907, but it's kind of a house that was always in progress. It was owned by a man named Henry Davis Sleeper, and he was an interior designer. Now, the Breakers was on 14 acres of land. Beauport is on less than an acre, and this house still has about 50 rooms in it. And Henry Davis Sleeper could not stop building. He came up, he'd collect something, it would inspire a room, and he'd build it onto his house. So much so that his neighbors put up like a 12-foot wall, and he built right up to that wall. So as a reminder, it's in Gloucester, Massachusetts. It's right on the water. It's literally perched like on this big rock face here. And you can see from the back, it is a mishmash of styles. If you're floating by on a boat, you might think like, what is this monstrosity? But every room was a unique space onto itself, completely designed and styled by Henry Davis Sleeper. So let's go inside here. And I should mention that Beauport is owned by Historic New England, and you can go and visit it today. You should get reservations in advance, though. So this is just one of the many spaces. This is a double height living area called the China Trade Room. And the whole space is inspired by this wallpaper that he found that had once belonged to one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. So why not build a room around it? And that's exactly what he did. So he brings in furnishings and other kinds of decorative details, all to kind of underscore the sensibility of the wallpaper there. And this is a little balcony walkway where you can kind of pass through and look down into this room as well. Now, there is no continuous thread as you move from room to room. They are so distinct. But one of the things that he was very interested in was American history. So he might find a portrait or something like this and then build a room around it. This is the octagon room. So he tried to put as many 8-sided things or sequences of 8 in this room as possible, most notably the octagonal table here. He paints the walls this kind of dark aubergine, gives us all these wonderful red highlights throughout, and gives us this complete space, a sort of contained space right here. Now things go a little bit crazy from here. He has a colonial kitchen in his house, even though it's done in the 20th century. And it's like his idea of what a colonial kitchen could have been like. So he collected all of these things from the colonial era, and he threw them all at this giant hearth here and sort of staged it beautifully. And this really set the tone for what a colonial kitchen should look like. So all of these properties that try to recreate the colonial era, Sturbridge Village, other places like that, were looking to Henry Davis Sleeper, this established designer, and they made their colonial kitchens and their hearths look like this, when we've since learned that this is not what they look like at all. They were much more spare. You wouldn't have all of these pots and ladles. It was like way too crowded, but it was an aesthetic that he really liked. He also built this very romantic 2-story book tower. And I should mention that all of these rooms are almost like 3/4 scale. You feel enormous in these spaces. So this is a 2-story book tower, but it's very intimate. Now, the chair back that you see over here corresponds to this space here. So this is all fairly tight. And this whole addition to his house was built because he found these curtains. And the curtains are actually made out of wood. So he found these kind of Gothic arch pointed curtains, and he thought, I'm going to build something around them. And so there you get a 2-story book tower. Now, throughout his house, you can see his collections of colored glass, oftentimes put in front of like a false window like this, so you get daylight coming in through them, and you have this sense that you're looking at like a modern stained glass window. They're just absolutely gorgeous in terms of the colors and the shapes. other nods to colored glass throughout the house, but these just kind of stop you in your tracks. And then we'll finish up in his dining room. It is no way as ornate as the breakers that we just saw, and you certainly couldn't have 40 people here for dinner, but it is a grand space for Beauport, and a wonderful nod to the ocean here too, because we've got the seafoam green furniture, the green flatware, the model ship over here, and this is actually called the Golden Step Room. So you can imagine at the right time of day, this is a golden space, all of these decorative arts elements just kind of gleaming in this light. And who among us wouldn't want to sit at this counter here and just feel like you're eating right on the water? It's just incredible. So Henry Davis Sleeper just found these elements, salvaged these window frames, and threw them into his house, and provided these framed views of the water, these intimate connection points with the water that in so many ways sort of remind me of Edward Hopper and that kind of ambiguous relationship with the sea that he set up in his paintings. So we will quickly finish up with just a couple of big ideas here. We've seen tumultuous waves and wild sea spray, and we've seen serene candy-colored sunsets. We've seen summer cottages, both quaint and palatial. And in the end, we have this sense that it's this irresistible mix of salt water and fresh air that keeps drawing us back, and these artists and architects, to create these grand works that that I think are just absolutely dazzling. So thank you so much for spending your evening with me. I welcome any questions or comments that you have about the works that we saw tonight.
Thank you so much, Jane, for joining us and talking about the New England coast. It is one of my favorite places to visit in the summer. I usually try and get at least one beach day where I can just sit and enjoy the ocean. And I actually have a question for you that's not super related to the ocean. I've noticed that in some of your presentations, it's really fun when you find like a really weird house or building and you talk about it. And I was wondering if you have or have plans to develop some kind of presentation that's just all of the weirdest houses that you've seen. Because I remember one earlier on in the series was, I mean, there was the glass house, but then there was also the house that was odd angles and distorted proportions. And you said that when you walked in, like you got really sick.
Yes.
And then this house that's like like 50 different rooms that's all different. I think it would be really cool to see the weirdest architecture.
That would be so much fun. I think when my kids get a little bit older, we'll definitely do some in-person tours. That would be so much fun, right? Weekend retreats where we just talk about art and architecture.
And you can write it off on your taxes.
Let's do it. Okay, everybody, like put on your calendar 3 years from now. That's what we'll be doing. But Sue, I love that you remember that the building at the glass house, it was like an outbuilding there, and it does make you sick when you walk inside because of all of those weird angles and everything. Beauport there are some rooms that could make you feel very claustrophobic, and yeah, the scale and proportions are off there too. Apparently that's an interest of mine. Lucy asked a good question here. Oh, thank you, Lucy, for your interest. And I think tonight's program was recorded too, so you might be able to catch those first few minutes. I've given this program many times this month. It was a popular program, so I think even if you looked it up on YouTube, you might be able to find it. Most of the teaching and speaking that I do is through my company, Culturally Curious. So you can always go to this website, which is I Am Culturally Curious, and find when I'm giving my next Zoom. They're always for free. And I do occasionally do in-person programs too. So, so those are on the calendar page on my website. You can always find those. Jim asks about the Monhegan Artist Colony, and he says, who went there besides Rockwell Kent? Jim, off the top of my head, I don't really know. I'm not as well acquainted with the other artist colonies, and truly, they're not as well documented. like the buildings don't exist, or like they don't have like those wonderful panel paintings that they did at Florence Griswold. So I'm sure there's some good info out there on Monhegan, but and I know that there are many artists, but honestly in this moment their names escape me. But Monhegan was certainly a very popular destination for artists, and who wouldn't want to go up the coast of Maine every summer to paint? So thank you for the question, Jim. I'm sorry I'm coming up empty at this moment. Emily asks, do you know anything about the artist colony in Peterborough, New Hampshire? Emily, I think you might be referring to the McDowell colony. And I need to be better acquainted with the McDowell colony, but I think that's more or less like a really intentional effort to bring people, almost like artists in residence, together, as opposed to, you know, artists kind of stumbling into each other and like forming this community themselves. So I think that that is an effort to support contemporary artists today. I know that it's up and running, and there's some really incredible works, and I believe some public programs that come out of the McDowell colony. So it's a slightly different sort of structure to it, but still a supportive place for artists. And let me just make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, thanks for the kind words, everybody. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you had a good time tonight. Oh, and you know what? I really appreciate you, Alice, coming in from Memphis. I hope you can come up to New Hampshire or New England at some point and see some of these spots. Thank you for the kind words. Oh, I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. My goodness, I really appreciate it. So I hope you feel like you had a nice visit to the sea. This was like much cheaper than renting a vacation house, I think. Almost as good.
Definitely. And it gave a very nice overview, and I really enjoyed it as well. And if you all enjoyed it, and you want to attend another program that we are hosting with Jane next month on September 21st, Jane is going to be talking about Jackson Pollock, Lee Krasner, and abstract expressionism. That is one of her upcoming programs next month. So we hope to see you.
There's the destination for that one too. Another trip you can take so that you can feel a little closer to Jackson Pollock. And trust me, by the end of that program, you will want to. Even if right now you're thinking, oh, Jackson Pollock, you'll love him by the end.
I always find new artists and new ways to be excited about them every time I come to a program. If I didn't know much about them, by the end of the program, I'm really excited about them.
It's great to hear.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you have a great night. Let me know if you have any questions. You can email the Manchester City Library. And again, the recording of this program will be going out in a couple days with a link to a survey. So please fill that out when you have a chance. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.